B. I. I am B.I. Who is B.I.?
B.I. Who are you, B.I.? Are you a ghost?
Guys, it's me.
What?
What are you talking about?
Your name is Ryan.
Yeah, it's not B.I.
No, not B.I. Bye.
Bye? What kind of name is Bye?
Your name's Ryan.
No.
Yeah, no one's ever called you Bye before. Do you want us to?
It's not a name. No one's ever called me.
So you're not B.I.
Sometimes I think it's a little more nerve-wracking for the parents than it is for the children.
It's a big day for all of us.
Does it look okay?
Take a look.
Hoi, ik ben Esther en ik ben 14 jaar. Het is nu april 1940 en ik woon in Den Haag. Maar ik wil even wat met jullie delen. Mensen zeggen namelijk dat er binnenkort oorlog komt in Nederland. En dat we moeten vluchten. Zelfs mijn familie is daar bang voor, hè? Nou, ik kan me daar echt niks bij voorstellen, dus ik blijf gewoon lekker hier. Ik heb het ook nog veel te druk met school en met leuke dingen doen met vriendinnen. En vanaf 14 april ga ik vloggen over alles wat ik meemaak op het Insta- en YouTube-kanaal van Zep. Ga jij me volgen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra White, the news and social media editor for Kidscreen. Today, we're at the Rockies Roundtable to talk about the children's and youth nominees. I'm joined by Sarah CHATELAIN, a producer for Echo Media's About Sex, Marlies van AMERONGEN, trying my best pronunciation, a producer for Stepping Stone's War Stories, and KIRSTY Stark, one of the producers for Epic Films' First Day. All of these shows deal with more mature and difficult themes, but for a children's audience. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do you tackle big problems in a way that younger audience can not only understand them, but relate to them and enjoy the shows as well. So I'd like to kick things off by having each of you tell the audience about your shows. Kirsty, why don't we start with you? So tell me about First Day. What's it about?
A 12-year-old girl at a new school, but also the first time she has presented as female. She's transgender.
Okay, succinct. Marlies, can you tell us about War Stories and what happens in that show?
War Stories is a multiple platform show for YouTube, web only, and Instagram. And it tells the story about a Jewish girl named Esther during World War II. And basically we're answering the question, what if she would have had Instagram instead of pen and paper?
Okay. And Sarah, what is About Sex?
About Sex is a web series that talks about 35 subjects that kids want to hear about regarding sexuality. So it's a 3-party episode with comedy, information, and testimonials from other kids.
Okay, great. Now I encourage everyone to watch these shows as well, because those are good descriptions, but you really got to see them. They're all great shows. And I want to dive in a bit more so we can get to know some of the behind the scenes and some of the decisions about putting the stuff on screen. So Kirsty, for First Day, there's quite a lot that you guys tackle in the first season. I know you're now working on a second season, but even in the first episode, there's so many different trans issues that get tackled, and not even just trans issues, but issues that kids deal with that you're tackling. So how did you decide which issues to put in the show and which to leave out?
For us, we really wanted it to be an accessible show for all kids. So Julie Kausef, the writer and director, made the specific choice that Hannah would be starting at a new school because that's an experience that all kids have been through, whether they're trans or not. And then Hannah's experience is just different because of those additional pressures that she faces. So the choices were really around what would make an audience socially and emotionally relate to Hannah's character. We chose not to go down the pathway of showing any of her medical transition. But aside from that, we were open to tackling pretty much any issue that she might face, but in a kid-friendly way, where it was just showing the differences between her experience and what theirs may have been.
Yeah, I mean, some of those issues that get tackled in that first episode are things like, you talk about the bathrooms and which bathroom she's going to use, and how the school administration deals with her and uniforms. Was there a conscious decision with each of those issues that, we have to talk about the bathroom thing because that comes up so often with trans kids?
Yeah, it was really a process of consulting with trans kids and their families and listening to the issues that really affected them in their school experiences and what might make it harder for them to go to school or harder to feel like they could fit in and not stand out if they were attending school. So it was really just about bringing light to some of those issues, trying to model ways in which schools or other students could do better and be real trans allies, and also about always providing hope at the end of the day for Hannah and her character.
Yeah, the idea of providing hope, I think, is interesting. How did you weave that into the episode and the show of, having kids walk away with hope?
I think it was really about trying to find ways in which whatever happened to Hannah, if it was something negative, then there would be a consequence for the antagonist or wherever that negativity came from. We really wanted kids to feel supported. So Hannah has this beautiful, supportive family. She's got a great group of friends that she meets despite her nervousness at not knowing anyone when she first starts school. And throughout the series, she overcomes several obstacles. So, there's a lot thrown at her and it can be quite challenging, especially by the time you get to the third episode where there's all these kind of climaxes coming to the fore. But by the time she gets to episode 4, she really finds her confidence, and it's about her finding the ability to truly be herself and be proud of who she is, which is something that I think all kids can relate to, no matter what their differences are or what their background is.
And you talked about her dealing with some, obstacles and some people who weren't as nice. Often there's a thing in children's TV where the line is like, no bullying. You're not allowed to have bullying on screen. But you were talking about there are some characters that aren't as nice. So how did you sort of weave the themes of bullying in without making it seem like that was a good idea for kids to be doing?
Yeah, we worked really closely with the ABC, who is our commissioning partner here in Australia on that. Looking at what their audience would expect and, what the response might be from those children. And it was really about just any time there was a bullying instance, Hannah would have someone on screen either backing her up or showing that that wasn't okay. So you would see it occur, but then the messaging immediately afterwards would be like, oh no, that person said the wrong thing, or there's a consequence from, one of the teachers or whatever that might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now switching gears a bit to talk about Sarah and about sex. So you were talking about how there's 3 different segments in every episode. One that was interesting to me is you always end the episodes with these interview portions with real kids talking about their real experiences and questions that they have. So how do you pick those kids and find ones who are willing to talk on camera about some topics that are sometimes quite uncomfortable for kids and adults?
Well, it was a hunt in schools that we did. So instead of having the kids come to us, we went to them. That's for sure number one. So we went through a tour of schools across all regions of, it was Quebec at that time. So across Quebec, because we really wanted to have a perspective that comes from the city and a perspective that comes from outside the city as well. And so we went into schools, and some teachers really helped us. Any teachers that were, we interviewed kids that were in college here. So people that had psych ed, sex ed classes or psychology of sex were a little bit more open to that. But the real challenge was to get a voice from people who were a little bit more shy about sexuality. And in those times, we really had to make sure that they were comfortable, and every kid that was interviewed was able to say at any time, that's not a question I feel like answering, or pass. so a lot of them did, and some subjects were easier than others. But you know what? Once they were sitting there, and it just felt like it, I think they were just scared of being quizzed and getting the wrong answers. But once they realized that the answer was, what do you feel and what do you think about this, it went well for everyone.
Yeah, you weren't making them like draw a diagram or anything.
Not exactly.
Just their experiences. And then, you know, one of the other elements of About Sex is that you start each episode with a comedy element. And I was wondering if you could talk more about why you chose to do that.
For sure. Well, there's two reasons for that. The first one was it makes it a little bit more something fun to watch, and for kids to see an actor that they like or a personality that they like might get them curious to watch the educational part afterwards. But they're so interested in the educational part and they want so much information that this is the first reason, but the real reason is also to get the words out there, right? So whenever we presented the informational episode to kids in school, in a second we could feel that it made them so nervous to hear those words and so nervous to see those images that we just had to give them 2 minutes before that to hear the words, understand, and like feel that we're going to talk about that subject, which might be a little bit not scary, but things that they don't hear about that often. So the idea is just really to de-dramatize and have fun before we jump into information. So it was really that idea, and it really works well, especially with subjects that have words that we're not used to saying out loud. And I'm going to say them right now on purpose, but when you have an episode on the clitoris, whenever they're going to watch that in school, they need to hear clitoris 2 or 3 times before we start actually giving them information. Otherwise, they're not listening to anything and they're just looking at everyone and watching everyone's reaction to the word.
Yeah, it's sort of like shake it off, get your giggles out, and then we can move forward. Everyone take a breath.
Exactly. And you know what? It does the same for the parents and the teachers and the adults that watch the episodes as well. You know, it's the exact same.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Marlies, for your show, for War Stories, I know that it's based on a book, and you're tackling subjects from World War II. You know, there's many books out there about World War II, and I'm wondering how you picked this one and picked your character's story.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there is a lot of diaries on World War II. So we were looking for a local story, specifically Dutch, obviously. And we wanted a character that was hopeful. So we were looking for a girl. We chose to tell a girl's story initially. And then we wanted her to be approximately 14-ish. To start with, because the kids that we've made it for is like we aim mainly on 8 to 12-year-olds, a little bit over that. So, and they relate best to kids that are a little bit older. So that was one of the reasons we chose Edith van Hessen's story. But the other, and that's maybe even more important, the girl in the book, she was so sparkling, so strong. She had a lot of confidence, and she was just a funny character. She was just a bubbling, funny girl that loved humor and that just loved life to the fullest. So we thought that was necessary to tell this story situated in, World War II, where there's bombing, where she is Jewish, and etc. We all know war stories, but yeah.
Yeah, I like at the beginning, you get a bit of the who she is when she's talking about what career she'd like to do. And you see her saying like, I might be an actress, or I might be a reporter or an investigator. And it's very relatable to kids at that age, I think, when they're all trying to figure out like what hat fits best, sort of. Now, because your show was adapted from a different story first, that it comes from a book, do you think that made it easier to tackle a more serious subject like World War II, but for a kids' audience?
I think it's, personally, I love the relevance of true stories. So I think the impact to kids is, or the impact anyway, when it's a true story, it always comes closer to the heart. Same with Anne Frank, for example, because it's a true story. It's like, whoa, this really happened, and it's very close. So we really wanted that. But what made it a little bit harder is that Edith, that is the girl in the book, we called her Esther. She was part of the process. She is very much alive, and she is in her 90s, living in the States. So we were just trying to get the story being very honoring towards her, but also suitable to tell for our audience. For example, we what you just said, like when you enter the show, is that do I want to be an actress or a doctor or a reporter? She did. The book says she wanted to be like a psychologist or a doctor, but we were like, but we want to make it a little bit more fun too. So we really had a discussion about, can we, adapt that a little bit? And then so the what we came up with is that we called her not Edith, but Esther. So it wasn't her exact story, but it's very much based on her story, and we altered a couple of things in the series. But I think it's just it's very powerful to use a true story.
And how did she feel seeing her story or a version of her story come to life?
She is in her 90s, and I think it's she doesn't have Instagram, so it she loves it. She loves the fact that it's traveled so well. But that's it. Her daughter, though, she loves it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice. Now, Sarah, About Sex is also adapted, but not adapted from a book. It's adapted from a French series. Did you find going about the adaptation from French to English and making the show different in that way was easier than the first time around?
Oh, definitely. So it's something that really translates well. Once you've got the information tackled and you know what kids want to know, they want to know the same thing wherever they live, right? So it's a very universal question because they have access to the same material online that serves as either inspiration or recipe, and I'm talking about pornography. So they have the same model of what they see, and then they have the same taboo in their family and at school about that subject, and especially when it's related to anything else than protection or what you should not do. So the rest, what you should do and how it should happen, is always a very, very, very dark area where they have not a lot of information. So the problems that they have, if we can say problems, or the lack of information, is the same from a territory to another one. What is different is the kind of humor. So that's where we felt like we really had a big adaptation to do from French to English, because the comedy is so different in French Canada to English Canada. And so that's the part that we almost rewrote 100% to make sure that it was really what the kids wanted to see in English Canada. And then, but the informational part, we really never give them tips about what they should be doing. There's never a you should be doing this or you have to be doing this in the portion. So whatever we say or suggest in terms of information that they can choose to relate to or not is the same for both French and English. So that was a very smooth transition from a language to another one in that part. Yeah.
Okay. Now, KIRSTY, Sarah kind of touched on something there that I think relates to First Day as well, which is that, these are issues that kids know about but aren't talked about very often. And I think that's quite common with your show as well, that like kids are aware that there are trans kids out there, but that it's not discussed often, and it's not as common on other broadcasters. Why do you think that those topics have been avoided in the past?
I think because adults make television and not kids really is why they've been avoided. None of the kids in our cast and audience have any issue at all with trans kids. They're used to seeing them in their school or in their neighborhood or in their community. And, Hannah is played by Evie McDonald, who is trans herself, and she's the first trans actor who's been in a lead role on Australian television, which is amazing. But those kids got along like a house on fire, and they were all instant friends, and her being trans had nothing to do with their friendship. So I think it's adults that kind of treat these subjects as taboo or worry about how to approach them in the right manner, or they may not have been talked about in their generation growing up. And so what we're trying to do is make the subject accessible and give them a way to broach those subjects with their kids and model ways that, they can be good parents or good allies. Or, we've heard stories of families that have trans kids, but they send the show out to their friends and their neighbors to start conversations and help show people how their kid is just a kid like anyone else, and this is a way that you can support us and support our family without having to necessarily go through that education process without every single person that they come across and speak to, which is really lovely.
Yeah, that's nice. And then it's not necessarily like ramming information down their throats. It's just, it's a story about a girl. And you were saying that you've involved the actress that plays Hannah a lot in the story process, especially as it's gone from being a short film to a show to now a show with 2 seasons. And, I know we've talked in the past, you've said that you and Julie, the writer, feel like you are not the right people to tell this story. And I'm wondering if you can talk more about that and what you mean by that, and then how you get the right voices heard while making this show.
Sure. Yeah, neither Julie or myself are trans ourselves. We're both cis women. And the reason that we made this show originally is because someone very close to Julie, a young family member of hers, was transitioning at the time we started to make the show. So we wanted to, we thought it would be amazing if there was a show that her family member could watch on TV and see someone like them. Stemmed from there, but initial immediate decision was we need to cast a trans girl in this role in order to make it authentic, which we did. We were very lucky to find Evie, and her family were very supportive in reading the scripts and offering advice and talking to Julie about their experiences, and also introducing us to others in the trans community throughout the process. So we spoke to a lot of families. We had parents of trans children as well as trans adults in our writers' rooms for both the original episode and the series. And we also sent the scripts to GLAD in advance of shooting and received their feedback, which was really helpful as well. So was trying to involve the trans community in all aspects of the process. And now that we're heading into series 2, we have 2 trans co-writers who've co-written episodes of the show with Julie, and we're also involving a lot more trans and gender diverse people behind the scenes, both on screen and behind the camera, which has been really amazing. But the only reason we really felt like we could tell this story is because as a 12-year-old character, there's not really any 12-year-old that can, write and create a TV show. So we felt like we were able to support that process and that story. Now Evie is 16, our actor, and so she's really grown up. And I think if it were to go any further than here, it's no longer our story to tell, and it's the time that we would hand over to trans creators to continue telling something authentically about those older teen years and beyond.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Sarah, you've talked about this concept before as well, about being worried when you're making your show that you're going to say or do the wrong thing. And I'm wondering how you overcame that when making about sex.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's and even the experts that we consulted with, no one can be an expert of, at the same time, legal issues with pornography and trans progressing. So there's many different subjects that we tackled. So we really wanted to have experts come in super early in the process. So even from the moment where we decided to choose the subjects that we were going to talk about, we consulted with an organization called CHATELAIN in Quebec, who is the organization that is the phone helpline, or text helpline now, or chat helpline now, but what we knew as phone helpline. And so what they helped us understand was, what are the kids' questions and what do they want to know? And then from there on, we worked on that. And then we had sexologists, which is they came from the school boards that came in and helped us to understand what do we think that we should educate the kids about. And then we had, for each and every single subject, different experts that came in to make sure that people were, and experts, and by that I mean people from the community. I consider them experts because of their personal experience, but also professional experts that came in for subjects such as body image or consent, to make sure that we really knew where someone that was going through that came from, and how to make sure that the series would never ever hurt anyone in the way that it would be received, and that it could just help, basically. So yeah, I think that having voices that you want to have heard in the process is really the key here, because they gave us such powerful hints on how to just twist a little something and make it more meaningful for the kids that need it. So
Yeah, and then Marlies, I know you've gone through something similar because you're taking the concept and format of war stories and now making something called slavery stories, but you've assembled a very different team to do that. Can you talk about how you're doing that and what that team looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So we've since it, telling a story through Instagram was working so good, and so so we thought we need to do that with more subjects that are hard to digest, or maybe in school are very colored in their telling. So slavery stories is going to be about a boy who is a slave in Suriname back in the time. So what if Kofi would have had Instagram while he was working on a plantage, or how do you call that? I don't know. Is it a plantage?
Like a farm, do you mean? Or a
farm.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, well, the word.
Sure.
Well, anyway, but that is a story obviously about slavery, about discrimination, about Black Lives Matter, about all of these things. And I think what just KIRSTY mentioned earlier is like, we're not the ones to tell the story, and I fully agree on certain subjects. We're just the facilitators of a story. So we really wanted this story to be told by a Black cast and crew, as much as we could, being very inclusive, obviously, but mainly heads of departments. We really wanted them to be of Black descent, and maybe even with the descent of slavery, or coming from Suriname, and those people that really carrying this message in their heart about slavery, and not, we didn't want to fall in the trap of becoming this white savior producer, white female, blah, blah, blah. So we really wanted to tell their story, just facilitate that story. So that has been a totally different process. There were no diaries back then, so we needed to find another true story, which we found. And we have been working with a writers team of 3 this time, of which 2 Black people and 1 writer, a female girl who is used to writing for young public. Our director is Black, and then we're still gathering the heads of departments, but yeah. So it's a whole different process, and really beautiful, and I really enjoy and learn so much in the process. And like KIRSTY and Sarah both saying, like, you want advice in from the beginning. So we're doing that. We're gonna have everything checked, and then take the freedom. After the check, we take the freedom to make it Instagram, because obviously they didn't wear Nikes. We're not going to wear Nikes, but just, we're probably not going to be 100% historically correct. And we're just making sure we're doing that in the right way.
Yeah, speaking of that idea of like putting things on Instagram, that's, obviously integral to the format of the way that you're telling these stories. But social media has many different ways that you can tell stories within that. So I'm wondering what your ground rules were going in for war stories specifically, about things that you weren't going to do when telling this story on Instagram.
Yeah, that has to do a lot with how you produce drama, or how you produce drama on set. So Instagram makes it impossible to have more angles. So there's just one angle, and that's the phone, and that is how you shoot it. So you don't cut it, you don't edit, you just, that is it. So it's just one take, that is it. So you have to do your homework on the upfront within the script already. And that is interesting, because all of a sudden it's like, and we see them running in the hallway. It's like, no, the camera is here, so you can't hear them or see them running in hallways. So the angle is fully different, but that is the power of it, because you have just one main character. In this case, it's Esther, and she's just tagging you along in her life, and everything she sees and does is from her perspective. So it's pretty powerful. And so we've decided that only a couple of times we can just put down the phone. So you do have a little bit of a scene, but it's still just one angle. Sometimes her boyfriend takes the phone and she's like, oh, she looks so pretty today. And then we see her. Obviously, we do want to see that every now and then. So the angle, that is the basic thing. And the other thing is, and that worked really well for us. We had to tell a story within 3 weeks, daily uploads of about 3.5 weeks. We had to tell 4.5 years of story, and that just works. That works brilliantly. So you just keep connected with her, and I think it's really a great way to reach this audience.
Yeah, you also see at points, there's moments when maybe she'll put the camera down for different reasons, that she's kind of like nervous about something or something's happening. And so you get sort of that angle, like you said, of like people's feet or something happening all around. That's sort of, it's not something you commonly would see in a show, but makes total sense in an Instagram story.
And it also makes it really, the suspense level goes up higher. If you only see half of the camera view, it's like, oh, what is going to happen there? So the kids would respond like crazy to that, like, Esther, you run and hide, and people would just start to respond. And that is, that really worked.
Yeah, I want to talk about that idea of the kids being engaged with Esther as well, because in many ways, you know, she might not be relatable to kids at all, because she lived in a different time. Even if there wasn't a war going on, you know, it's hard for kids sometimes to understand the previous generations, but you still managed to make her very relatable. So I'm wondering how you did that.
I don't want to disagree with you at all, because it's true, you know, going back to 1940, 1945, it's totally different. How can you relate? But you can relate to falling in love. You can relate to being under pressure. You can relate to discrimination. You can relate to being oppressed. You can relate to having to fight for your identity, or losing your identity, or losing everything in your surroundings. So her story is, in that sense, very relevant for today, where all of these things still happen. So I think that is what made it relevant. But also the use of social media made it relevant. So we did a lot of polls, for example, like, you know, there's a scene where she had to collect her Jewish stars. And she's just like putting them in, like, where should I put my star? Left, right? And then people would just interact with that. So make it also fun. I think basically, I think it was relatable because of those things, because it's, you know, love stories, war story, it's very, very close. Plus she is so bubbly, and she would just look directly at you. So if you would have a movie, you wouldn't, you know, have that break through that wall, and then also be able to connect with her. There were, for example, there was one time when we had a Q&A. Obviously we did a lot of Q&A beforehand, and then we picked the ones that we answered. Don't tell. But so all of a sudden, this girl from 1940, she is in your living room. She could have been your classmate. So I think that's what made it relatable.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially now in a time when a lot of kids' favorite celebrities per se, or like, you know, stars are so accessible. To making this character accessible makes sense.
Yeah.
KIRSTY, now you've also talked about this idea about making a character relatable. So how did you and Julie go about making Hannah relatable to other kids?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we set it at the beginning of the school year, her first year of high school, so that other kids could relate to that experience. It was also really important to us. A lot of trans stories, especially stories about trans kids, have been told from the adult's perspective or the parent's perspective for adult content. So we really wanted to make this about Hannah, and she is in every single scene of the series except for one, where she's arriving late for her school camp. But that just automatically gives kids that perspective of Hannah, and everything we see that happens to her happens through her eyes, which I think made a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now for all of your characters are actually around the same age and sort of fit into that sort of like 12 to 16 era of kids. And so I'm wondering, from any of you, why make shows about that age range? Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, the characters the target audience that we have is 13 to 15, and it was our initial audience, but quite frankly, it goes from 13 to 25. So we've discovered that the need goes way beyond the age of 15. But to me, that audience is at a very interesting stage in their life, and I love teenagers and I love teenage audience because they're they're at that stage where they are starting to select what values they're going to keep from what they've learned at home. They're starting to select and that does not happen very consciously, but it really does. And what they're going to take from friends, and what they're going to take from school, and what they're going to take from their environment. So they're really, we often say that the preschool audiences or kids audience are sponges, right? Well, and they just absorb everything that you teach them. Well, teenagers, they're sponges, but they're selective sponges. And it's where it's such an interesting audience, because whenever you give them something that they're like, this is interesting to me, they're going to keep it, and then they're going to become ambassadors of it. So that's another thing that I love about an audience is once they've absorbed something and that they've selected it, they're very vocal about what they think and what they like and what they don't like and so it's and especially with sexuality and Kirsty, you mentioned it earlier, it's a subject that is often viewed from the parents' point of view, right? So they're scared about what their kids are going to do, or they're nervous about what's going to happen, and what they see, like they see so much pornography and everything. So, but the kids' vision is very different. I mean, they're not, they're just trying to explore and understand what's going on with them. So what I love about that audience is that they're going to come back home, and a lot of them are going to talk to their parents about it. And then the education is going to go the other way around. And they're going to teach them how their generation sees some subjects, and some subjects such as sexual orientation is a subject that we tackle in the series, but quite frankly, to them, to most of them, it's a non-issue, and it's not viewed as something. It's viewed very, very differently from a generation that is only 15 years later. So they're fresh, and they're so vocal about what they think, is what I think makes them really a great audience to speak to, but they're also hard to find, hard to get engaged, and it's hard to find the right tone to speak to them. It's something that we really, really worked on and did research and tried things and tested things with them before.
Marlies, did you find that too, that it was hard to, nail perfectly what works for this audience and get them engaged?
So our range is a little bit less wide, and it's kids, so it's 8 to 12. That is just dictated by ZEP, for which we made it. So that is, in that sense, it's easy. So we did that. And obviously you want older kids to like it as well, and the younger brothers and sisters to watch as well. I just think I think the age of the main characters is one of the most important things. And for us, Instagram did the rest, because that is so relatable. You like it or you don't. And then, we obviously had some stories within the story representing different kinds of people. There's the boyfriend, and there is another male lead. So we tried to do that. So for us, that was it. I think Sarah had a that is tough to reach, the 12 plus. Yeah.
Now, Kirsty, when you guys were making First Day, you and I know your team and you consciously made decisions to make sure it didn't look like a younger skewing show. You wanted it to look like a show that was for that kind of 12 tween audience. Can you talk a little bit about those color and design choices you made so that it would look like a show that fit that age range?
Yeah, one of the decisions that our director made in conjunction with our production designer and cinematographer was not to use or really highlight primary colors in the series. So if you look at the design choices, everything is a secondary color rather than a primary color. So it's not that bright, bold, poppy kids television feel. And I think because of the trans element of the story, we really wanted to ground it in reality and make it seem like a kid's ordinary everyday experience. So that design choice came out of that, rather than trying to make the world feel hyper realistic in any way. So that was a big part of it. And like War Stories, we were aimed at that 8 to 12-year-old audience, but wanted it to appeal to a wider group of people so that anyone could find the show accessible. And I think we really trusted our audience as well. And that was, again, a conversation with our broadcaster about finding the right balance. And you watch a lot of kids' TV, and I feel that sometimes, writers will talk down to a children's audience or really over-explain things. And, feel like they have to spell out every detail, whereas we tried to give our kids the scope to relate to things in their own experience. And Julie's writing, I think, really beautifully wove that balance of explaining just enough for people to understand Hannah or understand a perspective that they may not have got to through their own experience, but also relating it back to what they had seen and done at their own school.
Marlies, I noticed you reacted to what Kirsty was saying about often kids shows will talk down to kids. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you tried not to do that with your show?
Yeah, definitely, because I think that is for TV youth anyway. So it's the same for 12 plus. We made a couple of web series, web only, for the age group 12 to 16, and then you find especially older writers saying stuff like they start to write dialogue. Like, yo, how are you doing, yo? And I'm like, what? So it doesn't work. You really need to do that well, or you don't need to do that at all. So when it comes to regular drama, but that is something that you really have to be mindful of. So that was I get that. Yeah, for us, we did the same thing, but then we didn't want to use too many modern language. So we really were looking for the language that we wanted to use, not make it too much of today, because that would be funny, that would be awkward, because certain vocabulary was not even existing back then. So we tried to stay in the middle. Same with emojis and stuff. We tried to stay in the middle, not make it bombastic or larger than life, because that wasn't just not the case. And it was a war time, so we thought we just need to be respectful with that season.
Yeah, I can't remember who the writer was, but I remember reading one TV writer once talk about slang and said, there's really no point in putting slang into your TV show, because by the time it gets to air, the slang will be old anyway. So why try and integrate it for whatever the time is? As we're talking about those colors and palettes, Sarah, in About Sex, you have a very different approach to it. Your show is very bright and poppy, and it has some, like there's lightning bolts and there's hearts and there's all these colors and symbols. And so I'm wondering why you made that sort of opposite choice to the other producers on the screen.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because we did the opposite. I think the thing is, we wanted the subject to be approached in a lighter and more fun way, right? Because what they hear at school is don't get pregnant, don't get STDs, and be careful because sex can be dangerous, right? So what we wanted to say was, well, wait a second, that is all true, and we're going to talk about all that. And the color theme just reflects the way we chose the subjects as well. So we have subjects that are purely biological, so you're going to learn about body parts and how it works and why it works that way. We have other subjects that are relational, so jealousy, love, because that's all part of sexuality, and it should not be something that's apart from it. And the other subjects that we have were about pleasure, because that's one thing that we do not teach them is, what does foreplay mean? And you'd be surprised to know how many of them have no idea. And so what is the clitoris, and what's its function, and why are we interested in that specifically? So the whole pleasure part was important for us as well, because it's, in the end, we can tell them that it's supposed to be a positive experience, but what if we cannot talk about the positive? So how are they supposed to know what's supposed to be positive about it? So the color choices was just a reflection of that. So we wanted it to be bright, to be fun, to be puffy, and just to, for once, be very in French we say assume, but I mean something that we were really proud of, and that we were not shy to talk about it. And we wanted it to be very bold and to feel good about it and be able to share it. And just like we would approach any other subject that's lighter and fun, we thought, why not approach sexuality that way?
Yeah, that idea of not being ashamed of what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly.
And then what has the audience reaction been like to the show? I mean, obviously you had the French one out for a little bit longer, but now the English one is available as well. So what has the audience reaction been like?
It's amazing. I mean, we're a small market right here, and we've got more than 50 million views online. So the kids are watching it on all platforms, and we have data that shows that once they've watched one episode, they go and watch another one, and then they go and watch another one, and it's growing and growing. So we are lucky enough to have the content on our broadcasters platform, which are very successful on both ways, in French and English with Télé-Québec and CBC. But it's also available on YouTube, which was super important for all of us, because whenever a teenager is going to look for an answer online, they are going to have an option that is fun, engaging, and that carries true information to them. So the reaction has been really, really good. And at the beginning was super strong, and then we were surprised to see that it keeps growing and it keeps growing. So it's really something that I think, well, there's always a new generation of kids that need that kind of information, right? Every year. So we want to continue to offer things to them and information to them. And now we're tackling new issues. We just launched the French version of using the same format to talk about mental health, which was obviously a huge issue for teenagers here during the pandemic year that we had, where they had no access to the usual resources that they had. So we are doing that, and we're also working on a third season about money, which is another subject that is of interest to every single human on earth, and that we feel like we're not truly educated enough and as much as we would want to be on a subject, and that is taboo, that we can't really easily talk about with people around us necessarily. It started with sexuality, and then it became an exploration of what do kids want to know about that we're not telling them.
Yeah, you're really hitting on all of the big issues there with, sex, mental health, and money. I feel like there's not much else that you could hit on that are like the big issues right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's really the things that also when you come to an adult life that you feel like you're missing a part of your education, right?
Yeah. And then KIRSTY, I know before the show came out, it's been out for a while. You were a little bit worried at first that there was going to be some negative reaction or negative press about it. What was the reaction to first day from an audience and from the press perspective?
It's been amazing, actually. We were concerned that there may be a response from conservative media that was quite negative, but we've found that the only negativity we've seen has been before the show was actually released. So there were a few negative corners of the internet, but as soon as it was actually released in that territory, it just completely died down. And once people have had the opportunity to see the show, they've had a really positive response, including a fantastic review in our conservative newspaper here in Australia. So that was something that we were really proud of, and cut the little clip out of that one.
Yeah, you're gonna have to frame all of the different press coverage now. You've got a lot going on. Marlies, with your show, what has the audience reaction been like to war stories? Both from kids reacting to it, but also, you have polls and stuff, like you said, so kids can in real time react to the show. How's that reaction been?
Yeah, really, really well. So we had, they always have those aim, the goals, because it was a first little bit risky to get a lot of money towards drama for Instagram, which is what are they doing? So that was interesting because it's still historical drama. So I think the Zap account would have, on a normal regular post, they would get 5,000 views or something. So I mean, Holland is not that big, right? And if we would have gone to maybe 6,000-7,000, that would have been hysterically great, but we went far over. It was almost 12, over 10 to 12,000, and the response did almost increase. Everything increased with over I think between 50 and 100%. So they really came back for it. It was over 300 or 3 million views, just the single views, and I think that was just really a lot. And what I loved about the responses is that you have just such a direct response from your audience. So it doesn't lie, the numbers on, that you get rewarded for how much people have watched your show linear is now totally different, because you can see which post did well, what did they think about this, and what was their favorite. You can ask questions, and that gives you a lot of information to just deal with. and take it, grab hold of it, examine it, and make the next show better. So that was really beautiful. And like we just talked about slavery stories a little bit, that was actually a suggestion from one of those kids saying like, oh, we loved Esther. Is it going to be more? Is it going to be something about slavery? And we're like, sure, there's going to be something about slavery. So I think this is really a new way of telling stories. Probably linear TV is gonna, go on, and we still, parents still want to get their kids for linear TV and then cook dinner or have them go to the cinema. But this is just, this is here to stay, I think. So yeah, good.
Yeah, and Marlies, you've talked a little bit about what's next and how you're taking that audience feedback into a new show. From Kirsty and Sarah, I'm wondering what's next for you guys and your shows.
Well, we officially start pre-production on Monday for series 2, which is very exciting. So jumping back into Hannah's world a year later on her first day of the second year of high school. And this time we're looking at the more nuanced issues of being trans in school once you've overcome that initial hurdle of your identity being out there in public. What happens next? So,
Alexandra, can I ask Kirsty a question?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, great. Because I watched the first episode. It was my meaning to just watch a little, then I would know who I would talk to, right? But I had to watch it entirely because I loved it. And I was just thinking about, do you address any of how the process of her becoming trans? Does that come back? Do you understand my question? Like, this is the first day of school.
As in the medical side of things?
Yeah, and
no, the prior. Yeah, no, we don't. Yeah, that was, I think, part of the decision as well. Like the very first shot you see of Hannah in the series, she's walking into the school grounds in a dress as a female. And that was really important to us because she is a female. Like that is not a question. And we don't want it to be a question for any of our audience. So we see her as female to start with. You do in the first episode see a small scene where she goes back to her primary school and she's still presenting as male. But from the point where she starts high school, she is who she is, and that's amazing. And that's all we ever want to see her as moving forward.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty strong. It's beautiful.
And Sarah, what's next for you?
Yeah, well, we're at a phase where the show is starting to travel. So in the upcoming weeks, we have some good news to share about that. So About Sex is going to be released in other territories, which is amazing, and we're super happy about that. And well, yeah, we're working on seasons 2 and 3 and tackling other subjects, and also exploring the world of TikTok. So we're trying to use the content that we already have, and instead of publishing that, just take the information that we have and recreate that information to make it a TikTok channel. So we're working on that, and we keep wanting to be there where the teenagers are, and also make sure that what we release for them on each platform feels like it's native from that platform. So for TikToks, it means you have to just start everything over again. So we're doing that. and it's a very exciting platform. So when we're talking about engagement and kids reacting, TikTok is amazing for that. So that's coming up for us in the upcoming months as well.
Okay. So a lot to watch out for from all of you. And I also know that you are all nominees, as I said before, for the Rockies Awards. So I want to encourage everyone in the audience to tune in on June 15th to the live stream to see who wins and also to see more interesting shows. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing that show.